The great white dragon lowered its head toward Denali just as Kumar jumped. With the full weight of Kumar's body behind the spear, it sank deep into the dragon's chest. Denali let out a triumphant cheer. The great white dragon roared and clawed Kumar away, flinging him aside. Kumar crunched to the ground on the far side of the icehouse. The dragon tried to breathe a spray of icy air at Denali, but its breath came out in a gurgling gasp. Its eyes glazed over. A crackling sound filled the air as its body crystallized into ice. Denali could hardly breathe as he watched the great white dragon transform from a living creature into a towering ice statue, majestic, even in death. Denali's feeling of triumph vanished. Tears filled his eyes, and he rubbed his chest. It felt like a piece of his own heart had died with the great white dragon. A groan tore Denali's attention away from the dragon. He ran around the back of the icehouse to the far side. His father lay crumpled in the snow. The front of his tunic was torn, and blood welled up from 4 gashes left by the dragon's claws. Denali raced over and whipped off the decorative fringe of his own jacket to press against the wound, staunching the flow of blood. Denali, Kumar's eyes fluttered open and he grabbed Denali's hands. "Take my hunting knife and use it to get the dragonstone." Blood trickled from a gash on the back of Kumar's head where he'd hit it on the icy ground when he fell. "The dragonstone?" Denali's hands shook as they pressed against his father's chest wounds. The biting wind swept shards of ice against Denali's face. "The great white dragonstone. The Southerners will pay anything for it. The tribe will have enough food for years. Enough to survive until the fish and seals come back." "But," Denali protested. "I'll be all right for a moment." Kumar pried Denali's hands away from his chest and put pressure on the wound himself. "Go get the dragonstone." Denali slipped the hunting knife from Kumar's belt and backed away. The wind intensified, and the dark clouds dropped lower to the ground. Reluctant to leave his father, Denali climbed to the top of the icehouse and used the spear embedded in the ice dragon's chest to stand on while he reached up to pry the dragonstone from the white dragon's forehead. Using the knife, he chipped the ice away from the stone until it slid free into his hand. Returning to his father, he knelt and held the dragonstone out for Kumar to see the dazzling white stone. Kumar blinked up at the dragonstone, then reached up and took it out of Denali's hand. As soon as Kumar's hand wrapped around the dragonstone, his body spasmed. He cried out and gasped, squeezed his eyes closed, and then blinked them open. They focused on Denali. "Who are you?" "Where am I?" Kumar asked. "What do you mean who am I?" Denali cried. "I'm your son, Denali. And you? You've been hurt. We've got to take the sled and catch up with the rest of the tribe. Kopik will know how to treat these wounds." "No, but wait, I have a daughter, not a son. Her name is Mani. Where am I?" Kumar tried to rise, but fell back when he tried to move his leg. Denali's makeshift bandage slipped loose, and blood seeped from the dragon's scratches. "By the fountain," Kumar swore, pressing the bandage back against the wound with his free hand. "Those will have to be stitched. Do you have a steel needle and cotton thread?" Denali shook his head. "Stay here, father. I'll get the dogs and the sled. We need to go." Kumar caught sight of the frozen dragon above them. His eyes widened as if he hadn't known the great white was there. He looked from it to the dragonstone in his hand. Then his eyes glazed over. "Amar," he cried out. "Amar, please. No, wait." His body jerked again and he fell unconscious. The dragonstone slipped from his limp fingers and skidded away across the ice. Denali retrieved the stone, tucked it beneath his coat, and dragged his father over where his family's tent had stood shortly before. Kumar's things were wrapped up and tied onto the sled. Kumar always drove the dog team. Eska had packed their other possessions, including the tent and its poles, on the boat. Denali peered down the sled tracks left by the other teams, but could see no sign of anyone. The tribe had gone. A glance out to sea showed all the boats out of sight as well. He knew his mother would never have willingly left Denali behind. Atka and the others in the boats must have grabbed hers and forced her to go with them. Denali was alone with his unconscious father. He knew how to handle the dogs and the sled, he'd done it plenty of times, but that didn't help his sudden feeling of abandonment and fear. An endless expanse of white wasteland spread around him. It was his home, and yet suddenly it wasn't. His home was the tribe, the camp, the tents, the smell of burning seal oil and boiling serpent meat, the sound of children laughing, women scolding, and men boasting of their hunting prowess. All that was gone, and only ice and snow remained. Swallowing his fear, Denali turned his attention to Kumar's right leg. It was bent wrong, and Kumar had been unable to stand on it. Broken most likely. Denali forced the leg straight, wincing at the sound of bone grinding against bone as he did. He wrapped some stiff leather around it and tied it tight to splint the leg. It was the best he could do. He dragged his father up onto the sled, covered him with furs, and tied him in place. Kumar's face was pale. Blood slicked his hood. Denali looked around to be sure he hadn't left anything behind. His father's seal spear lay a few yards away where it had fallen when the great white dragon had deflected it. And the tribe's small catch of fish and serpents spread around the dragon's feet. Denali retrieved the spear and bundled the fish up in a seal skin, then tied everything down to the sled along with his father. When everything was ready to go, Denali whistled. Kumar's dogs ran over to him, anxious for the harness so they could go with the rest of the tribe. Aluk, one of Kumar's lead dogs, whined and tried to lick his face. "Yes, he's hurt," Denali said. "Let's get your harnesses on. We have to catch up with the others." Denali made sure the snow hook would hold the sled in place, then he hooked up the dogs. They barked and jumped against their harnesses, ready to run. They hated to be left behind when the rest of the sleds had gone. Taking a deep breath, Denali stepped up onto the runners at the back of the sled, got a tight grip with one hand on the handbar and used his other hand to tug the snow hook free. The sled shot forward. The sudden silence as the dogs stopped barking and put all their strength into dashing across the snow left a ringing in Denali's ears. The rush of wind against his face stole his breath away. The dogs loped across the ice, following the tracks of the other sleds, kicking up bits of snow as they went. The wind howled across the open expanse, and the first flakes of snow stung Denali's cheeks. The other sleds of the tribe had hugged the shoreline, staying close to the boats, but moving fast to get away from the great white dragon. Denali couldn't understand how they had gotten so far ahead though. The fight with the dragon had not lasted very long. Of course he'd taken time to climb up and get the dragonstone, and treat his father's wounds. But the tribe couldn't be that far ahead. Besides, with a storm blowing in, they wouldn't go too far. They'd want to set up the tents before the worst of the storm hit. In the great north, day and night had little meaning. In the winter, the sun never quite tipped up above the horizon, leaving the land in perpetual twilight. In the summer, the sun rose in the spring and stayed low on the horizon until it set in the fall. Kumar had told Denali that in the south the sun rose and set in 24-hour periods. Denali had a hard time grasping the concept. The Tuniats slept when they got tired, and woke when they'd rested. Denali fought to stay awake while the dogs carried him into the biting wind. He'd rest when he caught up with the tribe. The darkness deepened as the snow fell thicker. Denali lost sight of the trail left by the other teams. It lingered somewhere beyond the veil of snow that obscured his vision. He could only see the length of the sled and the tails of the dogs that pulled it. But the dogs kept moving. They could smell the trail and would follow it to the new camp. Kumar had often told Denali, "When you cannot see, you must trust the dogs." Now Kumar lay limp and silent on the sled. Snow clung to the edges of his hood, and ice crystals encrusted his beard. Frozen flakes gathered on Denali's eyelashes, and he brushed them away every few moments as he squinted into the sheet of snow ahead, looking for the dark smudges against the ice that would be the tents of the camp. He could barely hear the sound of the dogs panting and the sled sliding across the ground, but he strained to hear the sound of voices carried on the wind. Instead, he heard a rumbling sound. The ground shook. "Aluk, stop!" He shouted and grabbed the snow hook from where it hung on the side of the sled. "Stop! Aluk!" The rumbling grew louder. Aluk put on a burst of speed, unwilling to stop before rejoining the rest of the tribe. Denali reached down and tried to catch the snow hook on the ice. The sled was moving too fast for him to stomp it in place. All his efforts only slowed the sled a little. "Aluk!" he screamed. "Aluk, gee!" Since he couldn't get Aluk to stop, he hoped the dog would at least follow the command to turn to the right and head inland. Aluk let out an angry howl and pressed forward as if he'd caught the scent of the camp close by. A terrible cracking sound rent the air, and the ice beneath the front dogs split apart. Aluk and 3 others went over into the sudden chasm, dragging the sled with them toward the edge.